Good evening and welcome to our Lenten devotional for Wednesday night. Today we're going to continue on the topic of being broken, and our subject to be discussed is ourselves and how we are broken people, and to discover in what ways we're broken, and then how can we lift that up to God. So we're going to look at ourselves, and that might feel a little awkward or even uncomfortable because we as Christians are taught that we are to be looking outward. We are to be focusing on the needs of the neighbor, and that more so than the needs of the self. And that is important. That is our Christian calling. But in order to tend to the needs of the neighbor, we need to know a little bit more about what is going on inside us, so that when we do reach out, it's out of a place of holy loving and care. Therefore, we need to be able to understand how we've been hurt, what needs to be healed, what needs to be transformed, and what needs to be transcended. Because if we don't, then the ways we interact with people come with all that baggage, and we're never sure if what we're doing for the right reasons and in the right ways. So during this Lenten time, we move into a place of reflection so that we can then be a part of renewal. So reflection and renewal, that's what the season of Lent is all about. Reflection and renewal. So in this time of reflection, we are going to look at, well, how do we get underneath what needs to be healed, what needs to be transformed, and what needs to be transcended. When I'm talking about what needs to be healed, we look at our lives and we really do look for brokenness, okay? So it could be something that's happened to us in the context of a relationship where we have been hurt, and it creates a barrier for us to engage in relationships with other people again. It can be a physical illness that has really changed the way that we look at the world around us. It can be mental illness that plagues us when we're trying to be a healthy person in relationship with one another, in relationship with the world around us, in relationship with God or Jesus. So there's lots of places where we can be broken in our lives, and so we need to unpack that and heal that. And to heal something, it kind of means knitting it together or sewing the pieces back together so that you have a complete fabric again. Might not be beautiful, but you have a fabric. You can get on with life. So that's what we're talking about with healing. With transforming, it may be all of those things that I just talked about, the ugly parts of life. But you do more than simply knit those pieces back together or sew those pieces back together into a whole fabric. You work with those pieces, you massage those pieces, you dissect those pieces, you piece them together with a little more skill, or maybe a lot more skill. Because what you're doing is you're actually transforming something that isn't so pretty into something that's just amazing and filled with grace. So the image that we use for this is the image of the caterpillar moving into the cocoon and then transforming out of the cocoon or the chrysalis into the butterfly. So the caterpillar is the being that encounters some kind of event. That would be us entering some kind of event that kind of takes us apart, and that's what happens in the chrysalis. The caterpillar becomes a goo and is completely taken apart, and then is reformed into the butterfly, and then emerges with the beautiful colors and the textures of this bug that's completely different from the bug that was. Okay, so that's being transformed. And then the third category is transcending. Now, when we transcend something, what happens is, remember when we have all those injuries that need healing? Some of those injuries cannot be healed. They leave a scar. And they change our lives because of the scars that are left behind. And for life to have meaning, somehow we have to say that scarring event and the damage that was done is what it is. And we have to move on. We have to set it aside and we have to say there's nothing more I can do with that, but my life is still going to have meaning. My life is still going to be beautiful. I just have to leave that behind. So that's transcending, and I have an example of that. Now, you all know that I play flute, and I have played flute since I was in 5th grade. So it's a big part of my life. When I was in high school, I intended to play flute professionally. I wanted to go to the University of Wisconsin to attend their music school there, and I had a friend who also played flute at that same caliber, and then see if I couldn't play in a symphony orchestra somewhere. The junior year of high school, I had an accident with my horse where he kicked me in the face and tore all of the flesh from my cheek all the way down through my chin, off of the bone, and the tissue was ripped apart up into my nasal passages, and I lost a couple of teeth. And this scar here is where I bit right through my lip. So this whole part of my face is numb. It always has been since that injury. The way I use the muscles in that part of my face have changed out of necessity. Even up and through my nose, all of it's been changed. So it is what it is. The scar is there. It's been there since I was 16 years old. I no longer had the potential to be a professional flautist. Things changed. I used to have a beautiful tone. I used to be able to double tongue, triple tongue. My hands used to fly on those keys. My embouchure could help me go from the lowest registers up to the highest registers in a blink of an eye. But it couldn't happen anymore, and it hasn't happened since. And so my life was changed permanently. I had to figure out what I was going to do next. I healed. I am able to play the flute, but I never became a professional flautist. But my life has meaning. If it weren't for that event, I may never have discovered that I could be a minister. So who knows, right? But my life has been wonderful. I have been in ministry for 32 years. I have been dealing with this change in my face for like 44 years. I've transcended that life-altering event. So when we look at getting underneath the stuff in our lives, we look at what needs to be healed, what can be transformed, and what must be transcended in order for us to have a life of meaning and purpose. Well, I know that some of you might be saying to me that, well, you know, I'm now in my 80s and I've done all that I can do. I've done all that I want to do. There's nothing more for me to do. What can I do? Because, you know, it's hard for me to walk. I can't drive at night. I mean, the list goes on and on. I will tell you this. In the 32 years of my ministry, I have worked with many different populations. So I've been a youth minister, I've been a camp director, I've been a retreat center director, I have been a parish minister, and now I work in a retirement facility with people spanning a broad range of ages from 67 all the way up to, I think our oldest resident is 103. And in that time of ministry, whenever I have encountered someone going through a crisis, and that crisis could be loss of a parent, loss of a child, loss of a spouse, transition in job, joblessness, lack of housing, the ending of a relationship, and those are just to name a few. The conversations always come down to phrases like this: I wish I would have known. I wish I would have done something different. If only I could have. And those are all phrases of regret. When we look at this season of Lent, it doesn't matter what age we are, whether we're a teenager or middle age or a senior citizen or an older senior citizen. There are things that we can do no matter what our abilities are or our disabilities are that move us into a place of meaning and purpose. But each one of us has to figure out what that is for ourselves, because we all live different lives and we have different kinds of relationships and we have different kinds of abilities. And so during the season of Lent, we reflect on, well, how can we give our lives meaning and purpose in this moment in our lives? You know, when I was in ministry over at Grace Presbyterian Church, one of the members of Grace had moved into a retirement facility, not too unlike Breckenridge or Laurel Lake. And he had Parkinson's, and he had gone through the different levels of care. So he'd started off in independent living in an apartment, and he had moved to assisted living. And at this particular visit, he was in the nursing center, and he was laying in his bed, and he had tremors, so he couldn't really hold on to anything, but he had the remote control taped in his hand with his thumb over the top of it so he wouldn't lose the grip. When I went in to visit him, I asked him what he was doing, and he said, I'm doing the only thing I can do. I am staying up on the news. I'm staying up on the news. And he said, the reason I stay up on the news is it's because I pray for the world we live in. And when I stay up on the news, I know what I should be praying for. I have never forgotten that visit because I thought, that's amazing. He is bedridden, and he still has this purposeful call from God to stay engaged. And the one thing he can still do is pray. So we all have something that we can still offer, even if we're bedridden. We all have something. We just have to figure out what it is. So I come to these stories and I think, wouldn't it be amazing if when we came to those crisis moments in our lives, whether it's losing someone we love or facing an injury that alters how we can go about life, or a change in a job that changes how we look at ourselves, wouldn't it be amazing if instead of saying, I wish I would have, I wish I could have, if we can say, I took the time to reflect on my life, and I'm so glad I did, because I made the decision to do this, that, or the other thing. And so now I know, no matter what happens in the future, it's going to be okay. That is what Lent is all about. Allowing us to reflect so that we can renew and we can engage life in abundance. Jesus says in Matthew 11, verse 28, come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. What is it that makes you feel heavy laden? In chapter 7 of the Gospel of Matthew, verses 1 through 7, Jesus says this: "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in a neighbor's eye and pay no attention to the log in your own eye? How can you say to your brother or sister, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' while all the time there's a log in your own eye? First, take the log out of your own eye." I read these two passages together because there's a tension present there. First, there is this offer from God to take care of our burdens, to heal us, to work with us. He asks us, what is your burden? Give it to me, and I'll figure out a plan for you to feel rest. And then in the next chapter, he says, why are you paying attention to all of everybody else's problems? So there's that tension there. And the reality of it is we use other people's issues so that we are distracted from what's going on in our own lives. It's a whole lot easier to poke at somebody else's life and say, well, if you did this, or you would be better, or if you did that, you would be better, or I don't know why you do this or you do that, right? And so we want to not be distracted by what other people's lives are encompassed with. What we want to do is get our affairs in order so that when we are reaching out in ministry and caring for our neighbors, it comes from a place of understanding. It comes from a place of humility. It comes from a place of grace and compassion, because we know what it's like to be in the thick of it. That way, when we do have a comment or share some advice from our limited experience, it comes from a place of understanding that your journey is a difficult journey. Mine was too. Maybe by sharing my difficult journey with yours, you can find some peace or an anchor or something. It just comes from a different place completely. And so what I've come to understand is when we're in trouble, where we need healing, we're broken and we need healing, we exhibit signs of that. We exhibit a lot of signs of that. And I'm going to list for you some of the things that you might notice about yourself that says it is time to do some reflection. So, do you find that you're more irritable than you've ever been before? You snap at people. People rub you the wrong way quicker. Certain people where you may not have had a friendship with them, but they were in your space and you tolerated them. Now you can't tolerate them at all. So, irritable, impatient. You find yourself snapping at the clerk at the store checkout counter or the bank teller because they just aren't fast enough. You get angry with your computer because it's taking a while to boot up. Impatient. You can't wait for your dog to do his business in the backyard because you want to close that door. It's cold out there. Do you have a negative attitude about everything? Every time someone brings up a subject from spring to winter, or what color it is, or you name a topic and you have something negative to say about it. Those are indicators that stuff isn't okay inside. There's some other indicators that you might attribute, since we're all most of us are over 60. So you might attribute these things to simply aging, but I don't want you to do that. I work in a facility full of aged people, and people are bright and active and full of purpose. So just because you're older doesn't mean that you are going to experience some things. So these things that I'm going to list for you now might not be because you're older, but because you have a brokenness that you need to deal with. So those are things like, do you feel fatigued? Well, if you've had COVID, you might feel fatigued. But if you didn't have COVID and you're feeling fatigued, why is that? Do you have poor concentration? Okay, again, if you've had COVID, you might have poor concentration. It might be a symptom of being older, but it also might be a symptom of some kind of stress going on in your life that you haven't put your finger on. Are you not as productive as you've been, let's say, in the last 3 months? That might be another sign that you need some work to do. Do you lose your temper frequently? How do we measure that? Well, one of the measures that we use at Laurel Lake is that increase in swearing. So, do you lose your temper? Do you find yourself swearing more? Do you find yourself wanting to reach out and touch someone or something? So, but the flip side of that is, do you find yourself close to tears? And not because you're watching a Hallmark movie, but because when someone's talking to you, it touches something deep inside, or you have a memory in it, and it's not a tear of joy, but it's a tear that releases pain. Do you feel anxious? Are you worried all the time? Can you sleep? If you're not sleeping, that might have a medical reason for not being able to sleep, but it could be because of this anxiousness and what is causing that anxiousness. So these are indicators that you might need to do some introspection. And we all do need to do that from time to time. Again, Lent is the time to do this kind of work. It is set aside for us to reflect and renew. So how can we adjust our behaviors and our attitudes in a way that allows us to renew and become better Christians, better disciples? Well, I am going to suggest 2 things. And the reason I suggest this is because we need to be able to map our progress. It's one thing to drive a car, and as you're driving, you're having all these brilliant thoughts about the things that you want to do, but then you get to your destination, you jump out of the car, you do other things, and you don't remember any of those brilliant ideas that you had while you were driving the car. We don't want that to be the case during Lent. We want our reflections to have a map so that we can use those to propel us into this better, more textured life. And so I am going to suggest that we do some journaling. And I've suggested this before, and I know you're all groaning at me. Oh, there she goes again. But I do want you to do some journaling. So I'm going to hold this up in front of my face. This is a journal, right? And usually you put a date on there, and you put the scripture passage you're thinking about, and then you scribble 1 or 2 lines, and then that's the last time you use it. That's not how I want you to journal this time. What I want you to do is think about this as being your prayer, okay? And I'm not even going to suggest that you read the scripture. You know the stories, you know the themes. What I want you to do is pray. So on any given day that you're doing this, and I would suggest that you do it 10 minutes a day. I don't care if it's in the morning, in the night, or if you wake up at 3 o'clock every night and you're having problems sleeping and you do it at that time. What I want you to do is to start talking to God. And as you're talking to God, I want you to write down what comes to you in that conversation. Again, we're looking at our own lives. So you might say, God, I had a bad day today. I got really mad at so-and-so, and I don't really understand why I'm so mad. God, why am I so mad? So you'll write down that you got mad, and you got mad with so-and-so. And then you sit there and you pray for a while, and you sit and you think, and then you realize that what got you so mad was that they said a certain phrase. I don't know what that phrase might be, but they said a certain phrase. And so you write that phrase down, and then you think about that again. And you ask God to help you remember why that phrase just put you off so. And then you might get an idea of why that happened. And if you get an idea, say that phrase was used to taunt you when you were 12 years old, and it's a hook, it's a button. It just unleashes rage in you. And then you write that down. It may be that you don't finish with that topic for a day in that time of prayer, and you have to go to the next time of prayer to finish that business. But that's what I want you to do. And so a journal like this one that I opened up for you may be the thing for you to do if you're a good journaler, but sometimes journaling is really hard, and you can make it easier on yourself if you reduce your expectations. So what you're going for here is to map the trends of what your prayer life is revealing about you to yourself, so that you can identify where you're hurting and what needs to be healed, okay? And so I'm going to hold up this paper, and it's called a weekly planner, and I simply downloaded a free weekly planner paper from the internet, and this is what I got. So it's going to be backwards because I'm putting it in the screen of my iPad, but you get the idea. And so, like, on the first day of the week, which is Monday, there's only 3 or 4 lines there. So you take those 3 or 4 lines, and that's all you have to do is say, okay, I prayed today, and I prayed about getting mad at so-and-so. What I realized is I was mad at so-and-so because, and I would like to revisit that again in prayer this week. And then you're done for the day. What's going to happen is you're going to map out these trends. And then you're going to see that, oh, I'm angry at a lot of people all week long. Why is that? And we can take that then, and we can work with that, and we can decide whether or not your anger is because of a wound that you will never heal, and you have to transcend it, or if it's something that can be transformed, or if you simply just need to knit some pieces back together to get beyond it, okay? So that's what we're going to try and do over the next week. Jesus promises that in our lives, whatever bogs us down, he's going to help us with it. He's going to help us carry that burden, and he's going to help us find rest. But we have to engage the process too. We have to work at it. These are our lives that we've been blessed with. And that's the challenge of Lent, isn't it? Because if we're going to use Lent in a productive way, then we have to really engage it. It's not as simple as, oh, I'm going to give up chocolate for Lent. It is, I'm going to give up chocolate, and that's going to change me how? I'm going to learn about discipline. I'm going to improve my health. I am going to improve my diet. I am going to improve my skin. It's worth changing this part of my life and maintaining that change even after Lent is done, because that's where the renewal comes. And so on this day of Lent, where we're reflecting on what does it mean to be in Lent, to use the tools of our faith, prayer, to help us transform and renew, this is what we're doing. We're engaging, and we're honoring the God who created us by doing so. So blessings on you as you go through this week. We'll come back together next week when we'll look at our brokenness in our relationships with one another. So, these things build. I mean, some of your journals might say, I've got a broken relationship with so-and-so. I've got a broken relationship with this person. I got a broken relationship with that person. And so we'll look at, well, how do we heal, transform, or transcend those things that happen in relationship with one another. So let's be in prayer together. Holy God, we do ask your blessings on this week. May we be honest with ourselves and with you as we reflect through prayer on the places where we have been broken, that we might heal, that we might transform, that we might transcend, so that we can become better disciples, true to our faith, walking in the ways of Christ. Amen.